All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Investing Club. I hope you guys are having a great day wherever you are, whenever it is for you. As always, it's Friday here on the podcast. So we're bringing that Friday energy to you. We have a special guest with us today, Jim Sheils from Southern Impression Homes. He's had over 2,000 rehabs and now does new builds with rent to own. Or build to rent. Sorry, very close.
Yeah.
Down there in Florida, I'm always jealous of people in Florida because they have the sun. But when it comes to July and August, those two special months here in Seattle, it's all about Seattle. So, anyways, I'm gonna hop us into the podcast. Jim, thanks for hopping on.
Thanks for having me, Gabe. Good to be here.
Absolutely. I told you before we started, we always like starting with stories. We like to hear how people got to where they are. You've had a long history in real estate, so I'm sure you have a good story. Why don't you take us to the beginning and tell us how you got here?
Yeah, I started investing in real estate almost 26 years ago. And I just started looking at entrepreneurship, reading a ton of books like everyone else, a Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I kept coming back to this real estate. I was looking at all sorts of business opportunities, and real estate just made sense to me. And it all started with after I did some home studying and listening to cassette tapes. Now I age myself, where I made that first offer on 432 North M Street in Longpoke, California.
Nice.
Family probate sale. I'll never forget. I got the call from Tammy Atkins, our agent, and my agent, and she said, "Congratulations, you've had the offer accepted." And I was like, "Oh, can I call you back?" "Great, I'll call you right back." And I like hyperventilated in my kitchen. I'm like, how the hell am I going to do this?
Now what?
Too much. Now what? I mean, I was terrified. But that's where it started. It was kind of feel the fear and do it anyway. And I, learned some basic, number formulas and concepts, and I just went for it. And that's how it started. That organically.
Nice. So you started, you got it from, was it on market, that first deal?
It was on market. I read a book and listened to cassette tapes, how to find a motivated seller. It was a probate sale, which I didn't know what the heck that was, but and this agent. Yeah.
When you were like, I'm always intrigued by people's first deals because I'm thinking back to my own and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I'm just,
Oh, no.
It's so important that first deal goes well enough to where you walk away with a check to you, so you're still motivated to keep going. And I'm thankful that I made a little bit of profit on my first deal, and so I'm always curious how people stumbled into their first deal. And the courses that you listened to back, this is 26 years ago. You mentioned probate. Were they specifically saying that you should go to probate courts and look for that type of deal, or did you just kind of stumble into it?
No, it literally was just look on, get an agent who works with investors, tell them what you're looking for, and have them bring you listings.
Nice.
And she brought
No
me
Zillow.
this listing. No, not only no Zillow, but I had to, do Yahoo Maps to go up and find the property.
You print it out. It says turn right here. You have to turn right.
Yeah. So there was, as you remember, that was something, especially if you were looking at multiple properties. But that one, that it started that small, and she made offers. She had to explain to me what a probate sale was. So I remember I had to make the offer, and then the family had to accept it. The funny thing was, there was about 6 properties. It was an old landlord, don't want her. The family didn't want them. Now both of us can sit here and go, I should have offered on all 6 of them because they were incredible deals, but I had the courage to offer on one that I thought the numbers made sense on. And for me, Gabe, it was a home run. I mean, I hit a home run on my first deal. So that's a little bit of beginner's luck. But again, I had learned some basic concepts and rules to follow. But that actually, gave me the appetite to keep going. Now I can say, the next dozen deals, probably half of them were break even at best on a rehab. But yeah, it starts that small, and it kind of is funny to look back on.
Yeah. I mean, you put out the number 2,000 flips or, eventual flips in your history at this point. So you've had, since that first one, you've had a long career. How did it kind of escalate from that first deal that you did? You got it done. You had the money in your pocket. You were like, hey, this works. I can do this.
Yeah,
What happened from that point?
that one I held on to. And,
Hmm.
I think I bought it for 152.5. It was valued, maybe I got a private appraisal 4 months
152
later,
in 26 years ago was 152.
150 for a three-family home.
Oh, a three. Oh, okay, okay, okay.
Three
Yeah,
family, it's just a triplex.
right.
And it appraised for 230 or 225 about 4 months later after I'd done the fix up and stuff. I got a private appraiser out there. And I mean, that was more than my sales job salary at the time, and I'm like, wow. And I held on to that one, and that house I eventually sold. It's probably worth eight something now. I think I sold it for five something when I moved to the East Coast. But I would leverage off of it, and that's what I started my business. And I moved from the coast because Lompoc it's a more of a blue collar coastal area. There's a Air Force Base, Vandenberg Air Force Base, but I moved inland to Bakersfield, California. I'd actually been working at a database service company that did foreclosure listings, so I would see these things
Mm,
and I'm going, where is this place? There's houses for $45,000. Where I grew up in North Jersey near New York City. I'm like, you can't get a cemetery plot for 45,000. So I moved inland to cheap houses. And so there was, literally one less zero from I lived in Santa Barbara, California. I had moved out there from the East Coast. The median price at the time was 890. Back then it was super expensive, very, affluent town. But in Bakersfield, it was 92,000.
wow.
So literally, a 2 hour drive inland was one less zero on the end. So it was kind
Yeah,
of, I called it
that's
the investor playground. 10% down on a $50,000 home is a lot easier to come up with. And I just got into with another good realtor who taught me how to buy HUD foreclosures. And I'd
mm,
fix them up and resell them to FHA buyers. And that was my model for the first few years. And I went from, I remember saying, oh gosh, if I can do, two houses this first year. Okay. Then if I can do, four houses this year, if I can, in the next year, can I do one house a month and then three houses a month? And it kind of grows like that. I'm sure you've seen that. And that's kind of how it went.
yeah. And were you these I mean, you were doing two a year, three a month, and were you building your team under you? Did you find good contractors to work with, or did you actually build your own GC team that
No,
you were
we subbed out to some good GCs. I mean, and that I'm sure for anyone listening on rehabs, that's not an easy part of the game, right? Contractors, you have to hold them to three things: on time, in budget, quality work. And to get all three is not always easy. And I'm sure anyone listening has experienced, gosh, that last 10% of the job is tough to get them to finish
yeah.
sometimes. So we had our own internal staff. I had my own internal staff, small, probably about five people. But we subbed out that. Again, I worked with a top-notch realtor who was great at finding deals and would actually loan me money. It was a really good thing. She
Hmm.
was well off, and she liked working with me, and I would give her a great interest rate, and sometimes she'd hold the paper so I could buy it and fix it up. And yeah, it was very organic how it started, though.
Yeah. No, I love it when things work out like that. When the right people come into your life at the right time, and you guys have kind of a synergistic relationship, especially at the beginning of your career. It's a big boon. So since then, I mean, you've really grown. You did 2000, as I said, rehabs, and now you're into the build to rent. At what point did
Yeah,
you go from buying these rehabs, doing the flips, doing the buy and holds, to now you want to start doing your own construction?
yeah, we went. I left California in 2005 because everything was going so crazy at that time, and went to Northeast Florida because the numbers were a lot cheaper and it seemed safer, better landlord laws, and still got hit here. Not as bad as Bakersfield did, but still got hit here. And I went into buying bulk foreclosures.
Mm.
From
This is like
2009 to about 2015. I was buying a lot of foreclosures. I'd fix them up, and either I was being hired by investors to do the work for them, or I'd fix them up and keep them myself. It was, if I kept one, I'd on sell one to an investor turnkey. The
mm,
word turnkey wasn't even really around. I just started getting, people saying, "Hey, I hear there's great deals there. Can you get me some?" And so we did a volume of those till about 2015. But by 2015, the numbers just weren't working anymore. Too many people were jumping in looking for the same type of properties. You'd have to, if you wanted to get numbers to work, you'd have to cut corners on rehabs, which is not a good plan. You will pay for it later and in greater numbers. So my now building partner, who I'd done some wholesale deals with back and forth, him and his father had a management company. And when I had gotten to Jacksonville, I had hired and fired 4 property managers, took my properties in house, had like 130 properties. I hated managing my own property. And I started to sub out to them. And they did a better job than me. So took over the portfolio. And then he kind of said, "Hey, what would you think about trying to build our own properties?" And I said, "I didn't. I mean, I was a rehabber. I was kind of insulted. New construction. I mean, that's
That's not my identity. That's not
no,
what I
that's
do.
no. It was kind of yeah. I didn't know what to think of it. But we threw in some development fees, and did a small amount of houses in an area we had already been investing in Jacksonville, and it went okay at best. But you can see the potential for it.
Mm.
And it's
And what year was this?
that was 2015. So it was 10 years ago.
So the hockey stick was just starting.
Just starting. And that gave us it was a higher barrier to entry. So a lot of investors couldn't do it. There's more steps to it. But again, it had less headaches, less surprises for ourselves and our clients, less maintenance and repairs, longer tenancy. We could build in better areas. We could create our own inventory. We build a simple recipe of single family homes, duplexes, and quads.
Mm.
It's hard to find. I love, duplexes and quads. They've been great for me building wealth. They're kind of hard to find. You don't see people building them often.
Yeah.
So we saw that there was a big demand, and especially, going through COVID, people liked this lower density. Duplex in a good single family home neighborhood feels much less like an apartment building by far, and it's still really affordable. So anyway, that's what we went into, and that started 10 years ago, and we were able to go from not only Northeast Florida, but to branch out into 12 different markets in Florida since.
Oh, nice.
So it's been really good. Our job is to build it right, finance it right, and manage it right. And we try to, specialize in that. I'd say financing it right is one of the most important things we do right now. We have our own in-house financing, which is really key because rates June of 2022 have just gone ridiculous, and we're able to, through a program called a Builder Forward Commitment, pass the savings on to our people, and we're locking people in between 3.75 and a 4.25 right now. So we're
Wow.
beating the big
That is
banks by
really low.
3%. Yeah, that's the difference, Gabe, between cash flow and the deal working or not, honestly. Because people say, how could you cash flow new construction in these Florida markets you're in? And that's how. I mean, and this isn't 18-month debt or anything. We're talking 10-year fixed 30-year AM or 30-year fixed 30-year AM. So it's long-term debt, and it's not cheap for us to do. But again, we're a volume builder, volume player. So it works really well for everyone involved.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, so that I invest in mobile home parks, self storage
Okay.
facilities, and RV parks. I used to do flips on the single family side. I haven't done one in a long time, but I've never gone into the build side. Never done construction. So I'm always curious when I speak with people like yourself who do new builds, what the pros and cons of each side is. So why don't you kind of take us through that? Kind of put yourself in the shoes of the version of Jim who was doing all those flips, hadn't done
Mm-hmm.
construction before, and then juxtapose that with yourself today. What do you feel like, I guess, the hardest part of new construction is, and then
Yep.
what are the things you like, and what are the things you dislike about it versus rehabs?
Yeah. So like with rehabs, you can find a house that's undervalued, say cash close in 5 days, and if it's a simple cleanup, you might be able to rehab that house in a few weeks and have it back on the market, right? New construction, you got to build. And also, one of the cons about new construction, like I always encourage people to go for infill lots, and that
Mm,
means if
within
there's
the
already
city
an
limits.
existing area, yeah, or just if there's an area where there's already housing there, but there's vacant lots,
Mm,
within that area or neighborhood, those are usually already close to utilities. They're zoned out for what they are. If you buy a big piece of raw land, this is something that people really forget. Like I said, the pro on these simple flips is you could buy it super quick, rehab it, have it back on the market or ready for rent. You buy a piece of raw land, that could be 2, 3 years to get it approved. to go through all the development.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
expensive, and people, I've seen that where people have said, I got a piece of land. I'm gonna develop it and build houses. And I said, what's your planned runway? Oh, 4 to 5 months. And I'm like, oh gosh.
Good luck.
And so, and I am that, rush. I'd like to get things done yesterday, but you learn with the new construction, that there's more time involved, and there's also more pieces involved. You have an existing home, you don't necessarily need a bunch of permits or involvements with the county. I mean, maybe if you're doing a new roof, they check, or BAC, but there's a lot more pieces to that, when you're doing new construction. Now, so that gives, again, kind of the pro to the old rehab side. Now, the con to the old rehab side is surprises. I
Mm,
mean,
yeah,
I've
had
bought
plenty of those.
tons of, yeah, right.
Get
And they're
into a
never
wall
good.
and you're like, what is
They're
this?
never, they're never exactly, they're never good surprises, right? It's, or rarely. Once in a while, you'd pull up carpets and there's beautiful hardwood floors underneath or something that's never been touched. But normally it's a pretty bad thing. And it's hard to constitute for those. And also with the older houses, I did a lot from, 50s and 60s. I don't know about you, Gabe, but even when I did new roof, new heating and cooling, new plumbing, update kitchen, electric baths, it seemed like we called it the 3-year curse. After 3 years, my maintenance and repairs just started to go up on these older homes.
Mm,
And with the new construction, we haven't seen that. We're able to build to a different spec, to a different structural design, that's more aesthetically pleasing and more durable. And so there's not surprises. You know what you're getting. And I think the product lasts longer, and also we're able to build in a little better areas. At least that's what we found. And so we're attracting a little better tenant. So that would be, a pro of that. Also, a pro is, like we joked about with the contractors, where we found when, you're rehabbing small houses, you're working with a certain level of contractor that will do your work. And, when you go into new construction, you're able to work with bigger outfits that have a little more follow through, professionalism, and can handle more. I'm sorry, with my smaller rehabs, there were some guys that stayed really steady, but with the amount of volume we were doing, there'd be some that they do great on 1 or 2 jobs and then they disappear for 3 months, and it's, that really irks the system. So new
yeah.
construction, you're able to lean on bigger shoulders that can do more of a volume. And there's always going to be some babysitting in any building you do, I think, or rehab, but I think with less of that.
Yeah, because you're working with more, like you said, professional outfits,
Yeah.
not your smaller guys that are just doing rehabs on the side.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So for flips, the pros, you said it's quick. You can get in and out relatively fast, and it sounds like that is the main pro that you liked about rehabs, is just the timeline is much shorter. You don't have to deal with all those permits, those approvals. It's just you're in, you're out, and you're done.
Yep.
But in terms of your return, well, I guess you already kind of alluded to that. Your return is not there. There's too many question marks in flips. You could get a great return. You might get a home run, but generally, there are things that will pop up that aren't going to, that you just couldn't know going into it. And then on the build side, you mentioned the cons for the build side is the timeline, and then dealing with bureaucracy, with approvals, that kind of thing. But the
Yeah. Yeah.
pros,
And if you're doing land could take, 2 years to develop. You can't just, like an old rehab, you can start work on it right away.
yeah,
Can't do that. You close on a piece of land, so you better have some holding power,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah. But the pros for build, you said you're dealing with better people, not better people, but more professional
More professional,
contractors.
bigger capacity to handle bigger jobs. With rehabs, you're kind of, like you said, you get that one wall and you're scratching your head and you're like, okay, what do we do here? And, oh, the sewer main break. Okay, well, and you're kind of piecemealing sometimes the best you can. Starting from scratch, you're not, it's just cleaner. It's harder to get into, but once you're doing it, it's just a cleaner process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. And so you mentioned you guys do 1 to 4. Do you do larger, like multifamily, or do you stick to the smaller residential type properties?
We get hired to do some like 15 plexes, and then, a few of the institutions have hired us to build whole neighborhoods, that they're taking down 200 houses, a development, they're going to hold the whole thing and rent it.
Mm.
But our sweet spot unit wise is just single family duplex and quads. We'll by fee build, we'll do some larger ones, but that is really our sweet spot, especially with individual investors, just those three.
Yeah. Well, the build to rent model, does that generally only work within tertiary markets to a large metro area, or do you see that model working also in, I don't know, Podunk, Florida, some smaller town that.
It's that in between. Like, we're not in Miami, we're not in Tampa, we're not in Orlando. The numbers didn't work there. The median price was too high, so the land would be too expensive, and the cost it'd be a negative cash flow situation. So we go to second tier markets, where there's still great population growth, economic growth, a good affordability index. It's desirable, so it's not podunk. There's things going on there, and healthy supply and demand. They need houses, but yeah, we're not in like the major three. We go a little below, but we're also not in distant swamplands where hear Florida stories. That just wouldn't work for us.
Your Florida stories.
And you can't do capacity. Like, we won't go into a market unless we can build at least 100 properties. And
Oh,
so
okay.
we're in about 12 markets now, and so you couldn't do that in a town where it's there's not many in Florida now, but there's out there with 400 people, and it's pretty swampy, and but that's not where we go to.
What metrics do you look at when you're deciding to build, like for saturate or for over, if the market's overbuilt with units? What specific metrics do you look at to say, yes, this market, it makes sense to build here?
Well, we're always looking at the population growth for the area and the inventory levels. What's the inventory? What inventory is available? We're finding, there was a stat. I just did it on a webinar the other week. For every 100 low income renters or workforce housing renters out there, there's only 25 rentals available in Florida right now.
Wow.
Through the pandemic, there was a big overbuild, and you hear, oh, Florida softened. Yeah, parts of Florida have softened. Those big three I just told you, expensive coastal communities where it went crazy up, but that's not our focus. We're going for that workforce housing that most of the big builders, national builders, they don't want to build. And holy cow, a duplex or a quad, that's like a disease to them. They have no desire to build those. So yeah, we stick to that, and again, we want what we look for is that affordability index. Like, is the population growing in that affordability index? What's the median priced home compared to the average family salary, family income? And that's a great marker for anyone out there for whatever they're doing. If they're buying fixer uppers or wanting to build, I believe go affordable, and affordable means something close to the median. You don't want to go bottom of the barrel. You go to the toughest areas, lowest price. That's normally a lot more turnover, tougher to do. And in the bad times, those really plummet in value the same way the high end does. But so stick close to the median and make sure that there's a good family income average for the area, that they can afford that house, whether it's to buy it or rent it.
Perfect. Makes sense. All right. I just took a peek at the clock. It looks like we have run it down. So it's time to jump into the quick question round. Are you ready?
Okay.
Let's do it. It starts with education. It could be any form, could be a conference you've gone to, a mentorship program you've been a part of, book you've read, movie you've seen, any of those. But I need two recommendations, one for general life wisdom and then one for real estate.
Real estate. I've been friends with the owners of a group called Go Abundance, and
Hmm.
spoken at their events. They're good guys. I'm a big fan, so that's a good one. For learning, if someone is, I mean, two books woke me up. I believe that our kids are missing three things in school: financial intelligence, personal development, and relationship skills.
Oh,
And I'd
100%.
say,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's,
right. I mean, they don't
yeah.
get those, and that
Those
they're
are
going to
the
use
three.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if I remember my first mentor ever, that sat me down and said, hey, and introduced me to real estate, he gave me two books, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. And Seven Habits is not an easy book to read, but it's a good book. And again, it kind of encompasses those three. So that was my starting point. For my sons, like my oldest sons, their favorite book that we've read together is The Alchemist. So if you've never
Oh
read
yeah,
The
yeah,
Alchemist,
yeah.
that's a great story
That's a
form for,
good,
I think.
yeah, exactly. Those story
Yeah.
form, like philosophy type books are, especially
Yes.
for younger kids. My daughter's what, she's not even 2 yet. She's almost 2. But I'm looking forward to reading that book and a couple others, when she gets
That's
there.
a good one. That's a good one.
Nice. Nice. So Go Abundance. And then you mentioned, Seven Habits and, The Alchemist. Seven Habits, actually, that was my first, when I first started to get into kind of, not, self-helpy kind of style of book, back when I was in my probably early 20s. That was the first one I read. Loved that book. Haven't read it since, but I do remember it had a pretty good impact on me. So
Yep.
good, good suggestion. That leads us to the next question. This is for your younger self. So let's go back to the gym who was just getting started. Let's say he was, making that offer on that property 26 years ago. Go back to him, look him in the eye, give him one piece of advice moving forward.
Own less of better quality.
Hmm,
That's it. That's what I tell
interesting.
everybody. Everyone's like, "Oh, you've done 200, 2,000 rehabs. You've what would you do differently?" I said, "I would do less of better quality." You become a deal junkie, and if you're, I will always sacrifice some cash flow now, Gabe, for a better position property,
Huh.
because I started in the tougher properties, and if I could go back, I would do less. I could say do less with better quality and less leverage. I was doing
Yeah.
5% down loans, and so if I could and I was able to stack up, own less, a better quality with less leverage.
Interesting. That, your episode, I don't know, maybe 600 something. And you were the first person to mention that, but I feel like that is very good advice. Even on the self storage side, I've gone with really small properties, and now like I just will not do that. And
Yeah,
with I don't have 30 years of experience under my belt, but with the experience that I have had, I see the wisdom in that piece of advice, because the lower quality properties, they're so enticing. You just want to go for them, but they just have so much headache associated with them,
yeah.
and it's not worth it. And so, own less of better quality. Really good advice. Let's go to the next question. This is about the U.S. It's a big place. There's a lot of opportunity out there. Give me the single metro you're most excited about investing in today.
I just did a webinar on it 2 weeks ago. Again, we build in 12 markets, so I believe in all of them, but Central Florida,
Okay.
Ocala, Citrus Springs, Inverness, that area's got really good fundamentals for those five I named before. It's got still a low median value for the area and a high average family income. And it's in demand. There's great economy happening there from a lot of things happening there right now. So that's our highlighted market for this year.
Perfect. All right, next question is about lessons learned. Not every deal that we get into goes the way we expect it. In fact, many times something goes wrong and we get to learn a lesson. So, what was a deal that went a little bit sideways for you? And then what was the lesson you pulled from
I got to just pick one.
it?
That's
I
gone
know,
side.
out of
You know,
2000.
a common theme of trying to force the numbers and
Mm-hmm.
just do the deal. And
Yep.
again, it really goes back to that: do less of better quality. And otherwise you're just running through the motion. So don't try to force the numbers, and be a little patient. You know what I mean? Of Because when you're forcing the numbers, your impatience is growing, and that doesn't usually work well for your sanity, your time off, or your wallet. So it's you know that's a common theme over many deals that I've done. Also, again, the common thing is know the area. I'm just if I can't walk down the street at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock on a Friday night, Gabe, I don't want to go there. I don't want to manage there. I don't want to be there, and so that's one that I kind of live by now as well. And I would tell anyone to consider.
Yeah. Both, both lessons that I've learned the hard way as well. Stick to your criteria is so important, and especially when you've had a kind of a lull and you haven't really done a deal in a while, and you're itching, you're scratching, you want to get something done. It's so difficult to stick to your criteria and, not, um and, not close on a deal that's not, perfect for you. That's not the
Yep.
numbers aren't quite there. But that is great advice for anyone. And then also, if you want to if you're able to walk in the area at 8 p.m., feeling safe is, I feel like it's a really good rule of thumb. I made that mistake on a self storage facility I bought in Arkansas at one point. The numbers were fantastic. Everything looked good, but the area that I bought in was high property crime, and I flew there. This is when I was just getting started, and I just wanted to close a deal. And so I bought it anyways. I learned it, got kicked in the face, got broken into 100 times, and so definitely a good piece of advice for anybody.
Good.
All right. That leads us to the last question. This is for your listeners. You've given us a lot to think about. For the listeners, you've given us a lot to think about. I'm sure they want to reach out and get in contact with you. This is a two-parter. Where can they find you? And then what can they expect when they reach out?
Yeah. If you want to contact us, go to southernimpressionhomes.com. And when you reach out, you can read about why we do what we do, why I gave up my rehab shoes, 10 years ago and only do new construction now. I don't do any rehabs. And kind of the principles we put together for us and our clients. Our job is to build successful portfolios without the headaches and without a lot of time. Our investors, they don't want to create a second or third job. They don't want to be in the trenches, but they want to have a long-term portfolio for generational wealth. And that's what we help create. So our job is to build it right, finance it right, and manage it right.
Perfect. I'll put that link in the show notes. So if you guys want to reach out, all you got to do is click the little more in the description. It'll pull down that full description, and in there you can find Jim's link. All right, Jim, that wraps it up. Thank you very much for hopping on the show.
Great being here. Thanks, Gabe.
Absolutely. For everybody who's with us today, thank you guys for showing up. You are the reason we do this. So if you guys have any questions, reach out to me, Gabe at therealestateinvestingclub.com. If you guys want to support the show, just leave us a review. Other than that, I hope you guys have a great week. Keep rocking real estate, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.